你是否有过这样的梦境啊？在梦里，你一次又一次地回到那场让你为之冒汗的紧张考试，亦或是成为了某款游戏作品中的模拟课，在星间旅行途中帮助需要帮助的人结交值得信赖的伙伴，顺手来拯救几次世界。梦境世界为我们提供了一个充满想象力与真实感的空间，有时甚至让人感到流连忘返。但无论是美梦还是噩梦吧，大多都存在一个难解的问题：我们难以用主观意愿去干预这个空间。那么，梦境能否被我们控制呢？本期英雄研习会就让我们一起来寻找答案。大家好，我是硅谷苍龙，很高兴能与大家一起探索星球下的秘密。一直以来啊，梦境与现实是许多科幻作品垂青的题材之一。从莫卓斯基姐妹的《黑客帝国》到克里斯托弗·诺兰的《盗梦空间》，从博尔赫斯的《环形废墟》到厄修拉·勒古恩的《社会性的梦境》，科幻作品的爱好者们一直在探索着梦与现实的边界。在崩坏星穹铁道中啊，各位开拓者将前往由梦境与现实相互交织而成的梦想之地匹诺康尼。在现实中呢，匹诺康尼是一座悬于银河中的星际酒店，而在梦境里，匹诺康尼则是一座川流不息的大都会，它包容一切，鼓励人们用梦想创造财富和奇迹。而帮助各位开拓者游走于两个空间的手段，则是躺进酒店客房中看起来像是浴缸的入梦池，然后入梦。这像极了我们平时进入梦乡的方式啊，躺到床上然后做梦。20世纪中叶啊，科学家们首次通过研究发现了快速动眼睡眠，并将其与梦境联系在了一起。在此之后呢，学界普遍认为动物睡眠主要分为2个阶段：快速动眼睡眠与非快速动眼睡眠。通常两者会在睡眠过程中交替出现。在此期间呢，虽然身体肌肉放松，基本还是处于睡眠麻痹的状态。然而，如果我们观察此时的脑电波的话，就会发现大脑中的某些区域则持续维持着活跃，这与清醒状态下的脑电波图样非常相似，眼球也会快速移动，仿佛在扫视着什么东西一样。但这不代表非快速动眼睡眠阶段就不会做梦了。虽然在此期间啊，大脑活跃的表现将降至最低，人体将获得完全的舒缓，但这时也会做一些相对情景简单的梦，只是大多数人都记不得做过了这些梦而已。我们能够记得的梦境呢，大多都来自于我们即将苏醒时做的梦。这个阶段我们大多都处于快速动眼睡眠，因此梦境往往也就更加光怪陆离一些。我们在梦中经历种种逼真的体验，但是事后回想，又经常会觉得梦境里的种种荒诞与不合理。尽管我们身处梦中时，往往意识不到这些违和感。那为什么梦境中的真实感能与荒诞并存？在我们做梦的时候，大脑究竟在干什么呢？恰巧啊，来自挪威的心理学家、神经学家、诺贝尔生理学或医学奖获得者爱德华·莫泽教授也来到了匹诺康尼，让我们有请教授为我们答疑解惑。
I'm happy to be here talking to you. Thanks a lot for inviting me. So my name is, as I said, Edvard Moser, and I'm a professor of neuroscience in Norway, and I work on the brain and also the relationship to behavior and try to understand how the brain works. So dreams are both realistic and not realistic. They contain some realistic elements, and those are, of course, based on our active experience. First and foremost, our memories, what we experienced during the day, sometimes also older memories, things that happen far into the past. They are the material that are used for dreams, and then they are recollected, often in a different order. And in addition then, dreams are also unrealistic because quite often those elements that we recall from memory are put together in ways that couldn't happen in a real way. there's also less control from what we call the frontal parts of the brain. Those that control in the wake state, they control everything and organize it. We know what's going on.
我大概明白了啊，其实做梦的本质呢，就是部分脑区的活跃，然后调动了存储在大脑不同地方的记忆的碎片，来创造出了如此具有创造力的梦境，而这也构成了梦境真实感的来源。但是呢，与此同时，我们负责逻辑啊、理性啊，最重要的一块脑区主要是前额叶等相关的脑区，它的功能的缺失，使得大多数人的梦境在演绎的过程中会走向荒诞，甚至无法意识到自己在做梦。而在很多科幻作品中啊，人物角色会清晰地认识到自己正在面对一个荒诞的梦境，并尝试在梦境中控制自己的行为，甚至让梦境走向依照自己的预期发展。那对于这类设定，我想知道 Moser 教授是如何评价的呢？
Yeah, it's interesting whether we can influence the content of the dream and even our actions in the dreams. So it's true that in movies it is indeed suggested that sometimes you can actually influence your dreams. So if you think very much about a particular topic that should appear in the dream, it's more likely that it will appear in the dream. But I wouldn't say this is a reliable method for controlling the content in a dream, because you may perhaps dream about this particular thing that you decided about, but the rest then goes by itself.
这让我想起中国也有句古话嘛，叫日有所思，夜有所梦。近年来啊，我知道也确实有一些研究发现，在睡眠前进行自我暗示，往往能够增加对梦境的控制，这也被称为所谓的自我暗示法。比如啊，我在睡眠之前尝试集中冥想，让自己放松的场景，在梦境中就更容易进入期望的空间。
If you want to control the content of a dream, then perhaps it's more likely in the early morning. And that's because the later during night, there are more and more dreams and you get more and more awake. You're getting then towards the boundary between dream and awake state. So as you approach the awake state, perhaps you can control larger aspects of what you're dreaming.
也就是说啊，我在清晨惊醒后，如果我怀着想见喜欢的角色的心情，立刻重新睡个回笼觉，就更有机会在梦中遇到他了。那按照刚刚的探讨啊，如果只靠自己，我们对于梦境的干预依然是非常有限的。那如果再借助一些外力呢？我曾经看过一种实验形式啊，科学家们使用可以刺激外部感官的设备来辅助实验人员在梦中保持清醒，比如通过在实验人员睡觉的时候使用固定频率的灯光来对其进行照射，让对方在睡眠中认识到本不该出现的连续的闪光，从而引导对方在梦中做出进一步的反应。对于这种方法，我想知道 Moser 教授是如何评价的呢？
It is true that light cues can be used like any sensory cues to influence the content of the dream. There are examples from other sensory systems, but you could use lights, present the sleeping subject with a light, and then train the person in advance. There's some probability that the person will then incorporate this into the dream. Maybe I should mention a study that was published in Nature just a few weeks ago. It's quite interesting. They had human subjects were sleeping. They then trained them to and instructed them in advance was that they should do during the dream. Then a person would ask them either to smile or to frown with the eyebrows, right? Do one of the two things. They could actually train them to do this, even if they were dreaming. So that means we are responsive to, we can be trained to be responsive to cues from the outside.
也就是说，在完成了一定训练的前提下，我们确实更有可能借助外界刺激所带来的暗示，实现对梦境的影响。 只是它们影响效果暂时还相对比较有限罢了。不过啊，这类研究也让我想起了另一个看上去比较玄乎的手法，那就是听我说，教授，催眠。这个手法是真实存在的吗？它真的能帮助我们控制梦境吗？
Hypnosis is a real thing. It is actually a different state of mind. There's a different kind of consciousness where the subject is very much concentrated on one thing. And that's usually how you induce hypnosis, that you ask the subject to concentrate completely on one thing. But those people are able to block out the outside to a large extent, and then they can actually be asked to follow instructions and do things until, if you want, they pre-agree cue and they sort of wake up. Freud, for example, used this in his early work with his patients. So he used hypnosis, had them to remember things that were difficult to remember because it was a lot of repression. In the same way, you can use hypnosis also for treatment purposes to bring up dangerous, threatening feelings and have subjects discuss them in a more relaxed way. It's somewhat different from dreams, but it is certainly a different state of mind, just like sleep and the different types of sleep.
也就是说啊，当下或许确实有一些手段可以去帮助或者说引导某些特定的人员去干预自己的梦境，但以当前的技术，确实还很难找到一个能100%掌控梦境的方法。
It is true that you can influence dreams to some extent in a limited way by influencing certain aspects to happen in a dream, but to control the full narrative, the full story of a dream, that is not something we can do under normal circumstances. And that's because of the random nature of dreams. But dreams can still be an inspiration for fiction, so I think no one can take that from us.
在凯瑟琳中，主人公现实生活中的焦虑，在梦境之中化为了恐怖的生死追逐。在《心灵杀手》中，主角陷入梦魇与现实的夹缝之间，不得不直面自己最深的恐惧。而在《女神异闻录5》中啊，星之怪盗团潜入由坏人潜意识形成的殿堂中，在欲望构成的迷宫中盗取对方心中的恶念，借助于对梦境的隐身表达，我们得以窥见隐蔽于现实生活海面下的庞大冰山。或许有一天啊，我们也能真正来到梦中的匹诺康尼，畅饮苏乐达，乘坐囚笼竞速，享受他人的奇诡梦境。但我们与一个如同匹诺康尼般绚烂梦境世界的距离还很遥远。我们有一劳永逸控制梦境的捷径，美梦与噩梦不过是一墙之隔，难辨规律。我们还是要面对现实中让你紧张的考试，还是要通过相处去结交值得信赖的伙伴，还是要脚踏实地干好手头的事项，来确保世界有序的运转。但在这里，我们也能学到真实的知识，拥有真挚的友情，并确确实实地感受到这个世界因我们而改变，因我们而向前。恰如Emily Dickinson 那首诗一样 ，Dreams are well, but work is better。